Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, and thank you for attending the Nourished Festival. What a great opportunity to learn so much. I appreciate the opportunity today to talk a little bit about what's on the label and whether it's meaningful or if it's marketing or if it's the law. So let's proceed. All right, so first of all, a little bit about the Gluten Intolerance Group. We are a 47-year-old organization, and we have three primary areas of business that we work in. We support consumers around the world to live safely and easily gluten-free. We also have two food service food-related programs, the Gluten-Free Certification Organization and the Validated Gluten-Free Safe Spot, which was formerly known as the Gluten-Free Food Service Certification. We have about 90 groups around the country, and we have 25 groups that are specific to children called Generation GF. We currently are certifying over 60,000 products worldwide, and we go into 46 different countries to do certification audits. And that with the gluten-free safe spot, we are actually in 3 different countries at this point in time. We include food services such as food service campuses, colleges, restaurants, hospitals, food trucks, and meal kits. So let's talk about labels. There is the law, and then there is the rest of it. So I think it's really important that we understand the differences. So let's talk about the law. Brand owners are required to follow certain regulations, and the regulations say that any advertising or any information on labels should not be dishonest. So it should be truthful and not misleading information. That is the primary objective of the FDA. Beyond that, there is information on the labels that is regulated and some that is not. And I want to talk about some of those points today. So not all terms on labels are defined, and we're going to talk about some of those. So let's talk about what has to be on the label. A label must include a common name for the product. So in this case, when we talk about Oreos, Oreos are a sandwich cookie, and in this case, a chocolate sandwich cookie. So that common name has to be on the label. You also must have on the label the address of a manufacturer, the packer, or the distributor, so that if you as a consumer have issues or concerns about the product, you have a way to make contact with the company. It also has to include nutrition facts, and these nutrition facts are regulated by the FDA. You also need to have a best by or a use by, sell by date. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean the product goes bad on that date. It just means that the quality of the product is at its best if it is used by or sold by that date. So that is important fact to know. Just because your milk says that it dates today doesn't mean you need to throw it away. It's a warning. The best by date is a warning for safety rather than taste. The sell by date doesn't actually concern the consumer. It's really telling the store, this is the date you should sell it by, and if not, pull it off the shelf. But it's still good. Labels must also include ingredients in descending order of predominance. What that means is the heavier the ingredient, in this case carbonated water, weighs more than citric acid, which is the second ingredient. So by weight, the heaviest ingredient comes to the top of the list. And then it has to include any information related to the top 8 allergens. And those allergens are milk, eggs, fish, wheat, peanuts, tree nuts, soybeans, and crustaceans or shellfish. The regulations around these labeling is very clear. Either it has to have a statement that starts with the word contains, in this case, contains wheat. That statement where it starts with the word contains is an allergen statement and is required to be there unless the allergen is clearly listed in the ingredient list in using common names. So in this case, Um, enriched wheat flour. Wheat flour is the allergen statement that is allowable. Sometimes you'll see things with dairy in them, and the dairy has to say milk, or it has to have the contains milk statement on it. So why will a gluten-free product have a contains wheat statement? Because this can be very confusing to people. Oh, excuse me, let me go back. Well, a contains statement is allowed on a gluten-free product if the ingredient that is in the product, let's use wheat starch as an example. If the wheat starch is highly refined and it's refined to the point that it does not contain any proteins, wheat could be listed as it contains wheat on the label because wheat starch can be a gluten-free item in a gluten-free product because it has no protein, but it has to say contains wheat. And that's because contains wheat, the contains statement is really meant for people who have anaphylactic type allergies. So if you have a reaction to peanuts or dairy and it comes on quickly, either lip swelling or GI distress, heart palpitations, things like that, rashes, those are an IgA mediated, an IgA mediated allergy. And that's what this statement is meant for. It's meant to protect the person who has that type of an allergy, also known as a true allergy. It's not meant to say that it is not, doesn't contain gluten. In this case, it happens to be that as well. So a contains wheat statement on a gluten-free product means that the wheat starch in that product has been so highly refined, it has no protein in it, and protein is the allergic component or the component that causes distress in people with celiac disease. So sometimes you will find this, and it's generally related to wheat. Okay, let's talk about may contain statements. May contain statement is not the same thing as an allergy statement. So a may contain statement is voluntary. It doesn't have to be there, and there are no regulations about how this statement can be used. So what happens sometimes is that a person who is, or a company who is trying to be honest and help you understand that this product may contain trace amounts of other items because they're all produced in the same plant in under the same conditions, and so there might be airborne dust and things like that. They're just trying to protect, again, the IgA allergic consumer. But it doesn't mean the product actually contains those. Just that the environment it's made in may have those items also in it. Sometimes a company will use this type of a statement as I'm going to cover myself just in case. And so what happens is if they have peanuts that is only used one product and it's stored in a very special location and it never comes in contact with other things, they may still put a may contains statement on the product because peanuts happen to be in that manufacturing plant in the back corner under lock and key. So you really can't tell sometimes what this statement means. So I would suggest that you pay attention to the statement when you're talking about gluten, as an example, with a grain of salt. It may or may not be there with the understanding that the manufacturer is trying to be transparent. It may also be there to cover themselves so that they can't get in trouble from any unintentional people who might think that they're getting sick from a product, but they really don't know. And again, it's meant for people with IgA allergic reactions. Interestingly enough, the IgA allergic community oftentimes ignores these statements because they also recognize that this statement may or may not protect them because it is unregulated. So can a product with a may contains wheat statement also be labeled gluten-free? Absolutely. there are a lot of products that are gluten-free that are produced in shared manufacturing facilities. Sometimes they protect the gluten-free lines with walls and things like that, but they consider the whole building to still be a common facility. So they'll put this type of a statement on there. Sometimes the equipment is shared, but all of their cleaning processes are such that they're protecting they know that the equipment is clean because of all the testing they do between the runs and things like that. They have a manufacturing process where they do all of the non-allergen products first, and then they do the major allergens, and after that they do a major clean. But still they like to put that may contains wheat statement on there. Okay. So I want to talk about, and I will answer your questions. I just want to go through all of this so that we don't get sidetracked and run over time. So bear with me a little bit. And Jeannie, I know, is helping me to look at the questions. So we'll talk about those a little bit later. So the next thing I want to really talk about is what are some of the other terms on labels? Not all label claims are regulated. Some label claims have certifications around them. Some are meant to be health claims. There are definite things you should know about each of those. But claims sell a product. So when you, if you're a vegetarian or a vegan person and you want vegan products, you're going to be drawn to something that says it's vegan. If you want to work with foods that are raw and whole grain, you're going to be drawn to those. So those words are buzzwords in many situations for manufacturers, and they put them on their products because they want you to buy their product. So I want to go through some of these claims and talk about them. You will notice in the process that I'm going through, what we'll find is that some of these products are certified. Some of these products have understood terms, but not necessarily regulated terms. So let's take a look at some of those. So let's talk about natural first. Natural is an interesting term because generally it is unregulated, except to say that by the FDA, if something has no added color, artificial flavors, or synthetic substances, it's considered natural. If you put orange juice into, no, let's use something else. If you put vanilla into an ice cream and you call it vanilla ice cream, that is considered a natural flavor. But if you put apple juice into a fruit juice, the apple juice is considered an artificial flavor in that case, even though it may be a natural product. In the USDA, no, the USDA says that natural is no added sugar, no artificial ingredients, and minimally processed. So when you see a turkey at Thanksgiving and the turkey says it's minimally processed, that means it hasn't been injected with flavor agents or preservatives or anything like that. It's simply processed to be ready to cook and has nothing else added. So it's not necessarily healthier and it's not necessarily healthy. That's important to understand. If you look at raw foods are also an unregulated term. The thing about raw foods is it's got a vague definition. So vaguely, the term raw means that it hasn't been processed to get heated above 118 degrees. That's usually the accepted term for raw, but it is unregulated. So that means it would include foods that are not pasteurized, not heated above 118 degrees. But any food could be labeled raw. It's also generally accepted that they're minimally processed to retain the nutrients and vitamins. So when we look at, say, a salad mix, that salad mix is minimally processed. It's been washed, it may be shredded or chopped, and it will still retain the nutrients. There is a raw certification, and we'll talk about certifications a little bit later. Whole grain is a really interesting one. So, and I would encourage you to look at Cheerios and look at all of the different packages Cheerios has. So whole grain is also unregulated. Generally, it refers to a grain that has been minimally processed and remains pretty much intact. So oats and oatmeal could be considered a whole grain because it's minimally processed. However, and it also doesn't have many added ingredients. So let's talk about Cheerios a little bit. Cheerios, when I looked at the store yesterday, has a gluten-free whole grain Cheerios. And sure enough, when you look at the package, the ingredients are whole grain sorghum, whole grain oats, whole grain rice, things like that. However, I would not consider Cheerios a minimally processed food. So what Cheerios does on most of their packages, it says that it uses whole grains, which if you're not a real savvy consumer would say, oh, this is a cereal that is better possibly than say Rice Krispies or something similar in nature. But the fact is the whole grains in Cheerios has been processed quite a bit and there are added ingredients. So this would not necessarily be a whole grain cereal if you compared it to something like a granola. Okay, so when you think of whole grain, you're thinking of oats, you're thinking of sorghum or buckwheat or rice that is minimally processed. And that's what a whole grain is. When people use made from whole grains, they're trying to give the impression that the food is healthier because of that. Let's talk about flavors in both artificial and natural again. And again, a flavor can be both artificial and natural. So going back to the example of a juice, a blended juice that says it is cran grape juice, for instance. It's got cranberries in it, it's got some grape juice in it, and it's got apple juice in it. Apple juice in this case is not a natural flavor because it is not something that would normally be found in that product. But apple juice is used a lot because of its neutral flavor. If you put apple juice in a jar and you called it apple juice, then it's a natural flavor. The same thing can be true with things like vanilla. You have vanilla bean, which is a natural flavor, and then you have vanillin, which is a synthetically made vanilla flavor, and it could be considered an artificial flavor. Flavors, both are made in laboratories most of the time. There are synthetic flavors. So synthetic flavor is always gluten-free and it's made with chemicals that will give you the flavor that you're looking for. And then there are natural chemicals that are used to make flavors. And those aren't necessarily gluten-free. So you do want to be aware of what the chemicals are. When you look at an ingredient list, if you have an ingredient on a list that is made up of multiple ingredients, soy sauce is a good example. Every ingredient in that ingredient must also be listed. So it will say soy sauce in parentheses, then it will say made from wheat, soy, and whatever else, salt, whatever else is in it. Okay. So be sure to read your labels very carefully. Other flavors that you need to watch out for, soy sauce, of course, malt vinegar, those would not necessarily be gluten-free. So let's talk about certifications. There are a lot of certification claims made out there today. Not all certifications are equal to each other, and not all certifications have the same meaning. So you really need to understand what you're looking at. The highest quality certification programs are third-party accredited. They have standards that everybody can see, and they are known throughout the industry for their high standards. So here you've got kosher certifications, gluten-free certifications, raw, non-GMO, organic, and the vegan. So let's talk about each of them just a little bit. But first of all, let's talk about the types of certifications. Certifications can be self-claims. So we are quite aware of companies who will say that they, and I'm going to just use gluten-free in this instance, that they are certified gluten-free. But when you dig down into the certification, it is a self-certification. What that means is the company has deemed what it considers to be certified gluten-free, and it puts that claim on its package. It may or may not have any meaning other than we make good gluten-free product, and it definitely is not monitored. So if you look at a company who's making a self-claim, it's very hard to find out what that actually means. There are also certifications that are not third-party accredited. So most of these certification programs that we're looking at are not third-party accredited. What that means is that they set their standards, but they don't have anybody monitoring their standards to make sure that they're following the standards themselves. And that's really important. So the third type of accreditation is a third-party accreditation, and ISO, the International Standards Organization, is the most well-known third-party accreditation. And what that basically means is they come in and they audit the certifying company to make sure that they have set up rules and regulations, that they are abiding by those rules and regulations, and they're being fair in all of their decision-making processes. So, and there are a number of different types of ISO accreditations. So the ISO accreditation that the GFCO program or gluten-free certification program follows is 17065. Basically, what that means is we are not only accrediting the manufacturing process that is used to be safe gluten-free, but we are also accrediting and certifying the product to be gluten-free. So we are looking at both of those. Not all gluten-free programs follow this accreditation. If you go back and you look, Beyond Celiacs and the Beyond Celiacs is a program that comes from Europe, and they do manufacturing process certification. Other certification programs do not necessarily follow either of these. So if you want to be sure that the standards are the standards and that there is no deviation from them, companies don't get special treatment because you happen to like them, it's really important that a third party be looking over the shoulder of the company doing the certification. There's also other types of certification, which include education certifications and different things. So let's look at kosher certification. And I will tell you that, first of all, kosher certifications have to meet kosher dietary laws. And they do look at products and ingredients, but certification, kosher, also has deviations between the various certification companies. And there's over 100 kosher certifications in the United States alone. Vegan is an unregulated type of certification. The certification is not required for use of the word vegan. And so anybody can still label their product to be vegan. It's generally understood that none of the ingredients come from animals, and that includes honey in most cases. This, as far as I'm aware, last time I looked, is not a third-party certification. Organic is the only certification program that is regulated by the USDA. So the USDA set up the regulations for what it means to be organic. And then they hire out 2 third-party certification bodies to do the audits and to actually perform the certification process. So there are 3 types of organic certification. 100% organic means that all of the ingredients are organic and all of the processing is with 100% organic processes and ingredients. 95% organic, or sometimes known as organic, means that at least 95% of the ingredients are organic. Some are USDA approved chemical additives, and some may be used in the processing of those organic ingredients and products. And then made with organic ingredients. This one says that certain ingredients are organic, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the ingredients are organic. And it can only be used on ingredients that are labeled such on the ingredient label. So this is this certification program oftentimes is run by third-party certifiers that do both 17065 certifications and manufacturing process certifications. The Non-GMO Project is probably the best non-GMO certification organization out there. There are others, but again, they're not regulated at this time. There's no government regulation on what that means. It's a growing trend in labeling. So a lot of products are now being labeled non-GMO. But regardless of whether it's a non-GMO product or a regular product, the food safety standards are the same for all the products. So it doesn't change the standard by which the foods are made. What it does do is it requires that these companies go through and make sure that there are no organically or genetically modified ingredients in their products, which is sometimes hard to do, but it is a growing trend. Sometimes what you'll see is a company, again, indicate that their products are non-GMO, or that they will use terms like non-GMO using verified standards. They're trying to get around the idea of having to actually go through a certification program using non-GMO. But again, it can vary program to program. Okay, so let's talk about gluten-free standards. Gluten-free is regulated by the FDA, and the USDA and the TTB do follow the same regulations. So they have adopted the FDA regulations. Basically, what the FDA regulations say is that an ingredient cannot be made, or a gluten-free product cannot be made with wheat, rye, barley, or the hybrids of those grains. It also has to be at 19 parts per million or less. And so this is just a fine line. It says below 20 parts per million. And so that's 19 or less, where the rest of the world has pretty much set it at 20 parts per million. Just a minute difference. It also says that if an ingredient is made from a gluten-containing ingredient, it must have been processed to remove gluten before it is put into a gluten-free product. So what that means is wheat starch can be used if it has been processed to remove the gluten, so it's pure wheat starch, pure carbohydrate, contains no protein, before it is put into a gluten-free product. This is really important when it comes to some of these products where you're seeing the terms gluten removed. That doesn't necessarily mean that the product has been processed to remove gluten ahead of time, so all the ingredients start gluten-free. And it's very important that you be aware of that. Okay, so I want to talk just briefly about GFCO, so the gluten-free certification organization that is run by the Gluten Intolerance Group. Again, we have a product certification that requires over 80 standards be met by all companies. We set the standard twice as strict as the FDA standards, and the gluten-free certification is well recognized by the consumers and trust. It is an ISO 17065 accredited program. So we are audited every year by the International Standards Organization to make sure that we are complying with these policies, procedures, and standards. And this is our new look. So look for this look. We're starting to see it on a number of packages. We're very excited about it. It just shows that it's not an easy logo to copy anymore. So the takeaways from today's talk. Let's just talk about it. Labels have to be truthful. They can't be misleading. Make sure you educate yourself about what terms mean and what is regulated and what is not regulated. Read labels and be aware of the sales hype. Say what is on the front of the package sells food. And these companies have some very good marketing teams. And so you want to make sure that what you're seeing is truthful, is not misleading, and is just not hype. I want to thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. For more information on some of our research and our literature, we've listed a couple of items here that you can go look for on our website, gluten.org. And you can look and type in the term reading or label reading, and you will see these items pop up for you. Okay. I thank you a lot for your time today. There are some questions that I do want to answer. So let's just go to these. And Jeannie, I'm just going to start at the bottom and work my way up. So Karen asked, can a restaurant that isn't 100% gluten-free be truly safe for celiacs? If not, how can a non-dedicated gluten-free restaurant be validated safe spot? So the answer is yes. A restaurant that is not 100% gluten-free can be safe for people with celiac disease. And the way that happens is by making sure processes and procedures are in place that protect the production of that food from the time it's an ingredient to the end where it's served to you. It takes education of the staff. It takes dedication to making sure they're keeping separate cooking sections, whether it's utensils that are easily cross-contaminated, and making sure all of their ingredients start from being gluten-free and are not cross-contaminated. It is very possible to have a non-dedicated gluten-free facility, restaurant, be able to serve safely gluten-free products. The challenge is that not all food services get it. And so right now, gluten-free is still a really important thing. They're seeing that they're able to get money from this, and they're trying to do this without being educated. And that's where it becomes dangerous. So we do validate non-dedicated facilities, gluten-free, because of the processes. And part of that validation process means we are in there auditing them and making sure that they're following their processes and procedures. Don asks, even though it's not required to label a product gluten-free, is there a way to verify it meets the FDA labeling requirement, if not third-party certified? So Don, you make a very good point. Products don't have to say they're gluten-free. There are a lot of products out there that are not labeled gluten-free. Is there a way to meet the FDA labeling requirement? And if they're not labeled gluten-free, they don't have to meet the FDA requirement. So a product, I'm trying to think of an example. let's say there is a yogurt out there that is gluten-free based on the ingredient list, but the product doesn't say it's gluten-free. It's still safe to eat based on the ingredient list, and that's why you need to learn to read labels. But it doesn't have to meet the regulations unless it truly labels gluten-free. And FDA considers any labeling gluten-free safe, gluten-free or safe for celiacs. They consider all of that gluten-free labeling. So there is a difference whether or not they have to follow regulations or not. But if it's gluten-free, if all of the ingredients are gluten-free, you shouldn't have to worry about it. If it's not third-party certified, the challenge is you need to just understand what each of these certification programs mean. So for instance, one of our competitors, they're third-party certified, but all they're certifying is the process, the same thing that we do in restaurants. So we could get a third-party certification for our restaurant validation program. They're not certifying the finished product. And some of the certification bodies who certify manufacturing processes require companies to put on their labels, the process is certified, not the product. And that's where we differ. We certify the product. Let's see, Mary says, is the wheat starch in Pringles okay? And may contain statements should be required, in my opinion. Well, Mary, I don't know about the wheat starch in Pringles, so I would have to look at Pringles. I would have to do some investigation. If they label it gluten-free, the wheat starch has to be okay. But there is a difference in types of wheat starch. So there is a food grade wheat starch that is acceptable for any food. And then there is a food grade wheat starch that meets the requirements for being labeled gluten-free. And that's what I don't know about Pringles at this time. May contain statements if they had some regulations around them, and if they were followed and not meant to cover the legal situation for companies, you know, that CYA statement, I would say it's not a bad idea, but they do scare people too. So a product that says may contains will oftentimes be perfectly safe. So products that we certify that are certified at less than 10 parts per million, we discourage the use of may contain statements, but companies want to put them there for full disclosure, and the product is still perfectly safe, but a lot of people won't eat it. Jody asks, does it list the information on the starch on the ingredients list on the tea box? Don weighs in, some teas are labeled gluten-free, some herbal teas may contain barley. Okay. So let's talk about tea a little bit. I can tell you that the way tea bags are put together, there is no gluten in them. They do not use a starch-based glue to put those tea bags together. You do have to watch out for herbal teas because some herbal teas do contain barley, and you would want to be aware of that. So make sure you read the ingredients. Because a tea is a multi-ingredient, because herbal teas tend to be multi-ingredient, they do have to have an ingredient label on them. So make sure that you're reading that label. Let's see here. Let me go back up just a little bit here. This is not, okay. My question is about wine. Why is it hard to find a certified gluten-free wine? Well, let me answer that question first. So wine is regulated by the TTB, And the TTB has taken the stance that they are going to follow the FDA's guidelines on gluten-free labeling. However, they still have some hesitancy about allowing products to be labeled gluten-free. The way some companies get around this is the bottle does not contain a gluten-free label, a neck collar does. So a good example of that is Tito's. Tito's does not put gluten-free on the bottle, which the TTB would discourage and not allow, but they do use it on a neck collar. So most wines are absolutely gluten-free. Even the wines where the barrels have been glued together, they have found very little gluten, if any, in those wines. It's also hard to test wines and other alcohols and fermented products because the testing kits are not designed to be used on fermented products. So we actually did a study and published it not too long ago on using mass spec to look at testing for gluten. Um, it's really hard. Companies don't quite know how, and neither do the regulatory bodies know how to deal with fermented products like this. So they take the safe approach and they discourage the use of it, adding that to a product label. However, we do certify gluten-free alcohols. All right, and Jeannie, I saw we had a couple more, and I think we're done. No, I think we are done. Thank you.